Hello and welcome to episode 279 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week we're going to learn about battery chemistries, including a previously undiscussed kind that works down to minus 50 Celsius. If you want to know how cold that is, if someone opens their front door in that weather to get the newspaper, they'll show up in the obituary in that very newspaper the next day, Brian.
A new e-bike speed limit is set to take effect next month in New York City. This is great news because we all know there are speed limits for cars and those limits are never broken.
A listener in Japan confronts our province's political leader about renewables, and we get candid information on where they stand, their reasoning, and how they're going to throw me in jail as soon as they get a chance.
Oh dear. For the first time ever, a driverless truck has completed a border crossing. When the truck was asked if it had anything to declare, it replied, "I declare the superiority of the robot army," and it promptly cut down the border gate with laser beams. But I, for one, welcome our new robot overlord.
All that and a whole crap load more on this edition of the Clean Energy Show. All right, Brian, this is a big one. This is perhaps our most monumental podcast in some time, so stay tuned, people. Come on board for the ride. Saskatchewan is where Brian and I live in Canada. Okay, it's a province of 1.2 million people. It's flat, not much going on, some oil. Next door to Alberta is lots of oil. But the three prairie provinces here in the middle of Western Canada get very cold. We talk about that all the time, but how does that affect clean energy? It does, because wind turbines, which would be a major factor here in decarbonizing the power grid, shut down at minus 30. They get shut down. The reason is, many, but some are dangerous because they ice up in that kind of weather. They can throw ice and different things like that. They become more brittle. So what do? You have to plan for that sort of period of weather, whether it comes or not, whether it's long or short or not at all in that winter. And because solar is great here, but it's seasonal in that we're up on the north part, so our days get shorter. The angle of the sun gets shorter, so you have to rely more on wind. That's the thinking. We're all going to get into that because we had a very unusual experience this week. We met one of our listeners in person, and not only did we meet them, they came all the way from Japan to visit their family because they're originally from here, but they spent 35 years in Japan. So we met a listener named John, and that listener happened to be a politician in Japan, and he met the premier of our province and brought up renewables and other things. And so we have some insight, some candid insight from the premier and mostly his chief of staff who talked to John about that. So it's a very unusual access to the thinking of what they're thinking and what's going on in our province. And I will challenge some of that in this show and next week's show, because we are a great example. If you can decarbonize us, you should be able to decarbonize pretty much anywhere, because we have these challenges and these restrictions of getting so cold. And also I'm going to talk to a professor at the University of Regina here who is a expert in climate policy and financing, and his name is Brett Dolter. We're going to talk to him later in the week and perhaps have a clip on next week's show and maybe another chunk of him on the feed, your podcast feed, if you want to listen to that. He has done some modeling. And Brian, I love AI for a new reason. I could take a scientific report now that is over my head, a little dry, I start to drift off in my concentration, and I can feed it into AI as a PDF document and ask it questions. What was he talking about this? What about this? Did this come up? And
explain it as if I was 5 years old, that kind of thing.
I actually go 14. That's the number that I like using. So compared to AI, I'm a 14-year-old. I think I found it a great way to do explanations for our listeners who maybe aren't up to date, because we get a lot of feedback that people are a little bit overwhelmed by our terminology. And that's why I'm going to get into a new segment this week a little bit later on explaining some things a little bit every week or almost every week and see how that goes. But last time I asked AI to explain it like a 14-year-old, they tried to use hip language like a 14-year-old could use. So that didn't work. AI is always changing, and sometimes it kicks you in the face. So we're late this week because you had a little bit of a medical issue.
Yes, well, I'm just want to say I'm really looking forward to a discussion about cold weather and clean energy. The one thing we do talk about is cars, because we know that EVs in -40, they do have some challenges. But if that can be overcome, and you and I have proved that it can be overcome, then, everything else should follow suit as well. But yeah, I had a tooth pulled yesterday, and I got to tell you, it was the best experience I've ever had having a tooth pulled.
What drugs did they give you?
There were no drugs. There was just the freezing. And of course, it's always the needle with the freezing is the thing that hurts the most.
Right.
And, then they started to pull it out, and I'm like, no, I could still feel a little bit. So then, they did one more injection. But then that tooth popped out so fast. It was like pulling out a piece of candy. It was so quick. It was the quickest tooth pull. I mean, I haven't had a lot of teeth pulled, but yeah, it just went super quick. It was only yesterday, but I feel totally recovered.
All right. Well, Kruger Energy is supposedly making a solar park right next to our city. In fact, not far from me. It is kind of in my end of the city. And they announced it in 2020 in the pandemic, and it was supposed to come online at the end of 2021 or in 2022. And every year I would go out and look at that solar park because I knew where it was, and nothing. And I searched it up, and all there was the news stories. There was one in 2020, several in 2020. And again, the company put out a news release in 2021 saying that they're still doing it. And nothing. As you know, Brian, it's 2025, no solar parks. It was supposed to be a 10-megawatt solar farm adjacent to the city and next to our utility where their substation was, so they could connect right into the grid because they had a building there that had access to all the power lines. And yeah, so the last news story is from 2021. Progress continues on plans for the development of a new solar energy project slated for the city's northeast outskirts. The facility will be the second of its kind in Saskatchewan. Second. Yeah. 3,000 hours of sunshine in the south every year. The facility will be the second, and it will generate 10 megawatts of power. And if you're wondering how much that is, as I am, that's 2,500 households in the province. So it's small.
Yeah.
It's not, there's a lot bigger solar farms that we talk about in the world, even in Canada. That's a tiny one. The site will be operational in the autumn of 2022. It will be owned and managed by KESS. Started working on the project in 2019. SaskPower, that's our utility, chose the proposal from 19 competing applicants. So I contacted them, and they actually got back to me. I contact a lot of people with companies that are renewable. They don't get back to me always. And They did. They said it's kaput. And SaskPower did not announce that it was kaput.
Yeah.
They did not put out a press release. So a lot of politicians from both parties in our province follow me on Twitter, as does the government, as we'll hear later. And so it's out there now. Now, journalists are overburdened in this province, as they are in a lot of places. They can't follow up and investigate everything. But I'm pissed about that. They should have announced it. I want to know why it stopped. I want to know what's replacing it and why they didn't announce it. So it's out there. This clip of me speaking will be out there. So there you have it. That project is dead. And it's too bad because it was small, but we need more solar here. And they just refused to put up solar. When we started this podcast, we had more solar on my roof than our power utility had on its grid, which is disgusting. Anyway, here's a new segment, Brian. You love new segments. I love new segments.
Yeah.
Why not? It's called Knowledge Break.
Knowledge Break.
See how I incorporated breakdancing into that? You get it?
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. So, battery chemistries. I'm sure people who listen to the show are sometimes overwhelmed when we talk about battery chemistries. We're not physicists. We're not chemists. But we are interested in electrifying transportation and using batteries on the grid to support renewables because the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. People tell you that all the time. And batteries are there to the rescue, so we're interested in what is going on with batteries. A lot of the battery makers are in China, and the technology improvements are coming out of China at a rapid pace. So buses, EVs, trucks, all of that, even trains, other things, bikes, motorcycles, last-mile transportation like scooters, all use batteries and storage of intermittent power for 2, 4, 6 hours, and even 8 hours now. Who knows what we'll see? It becomes not cost worthy to do that, but when people come home at night, those batteries are storing up renewables, and giving it back to you when you turn on your oven and your computers and everything in the evening if the sun is already down. Lithium ion, of course, is the most common one. It's energy dense. It's in laptops, phone batteries, long-range cars. It uses cobalt, which is controversial because children sometimes mine it. Sometimes they want to mine it because they get paid money for their family. That is expensive, but then they're abused and nobody wants to do that. And the people who don't like renewables or change cite cobalt. So that is there. But there are some that are not using cobalt. Lithium iron phosphate. That's just a different recipe. You're just tweaking a cake recipe here. You're taking one thing out and adding another. And they have hundreds of thousands of engineers, mostly in China, working on this around the clock, right around the clock, because they test them. They charge them and they discharge them over and over in a laboratory. And these batteries are now in a lot of cars, but they're less dense. That is to say, they hold less power in the weight and volume of the battery. So if you put that same battery in a car, it doesn't go as far as the one that uses the cobalt, for example. So yeah, it's not currently for long-range cars, but of course, they're like all battery chemists, they're always improving them. These can struggle in colder temperatures, which we don't like here in Canada, especially where Brian and I live, but they do last longer. They have a lot more cycling. So, typical lithium-ion battery can do 1,000 cycles from completely discharged to full before it starts to degrade and have less capacity. That doesn't mean you use your car 1,000 times. It just means because generally you're just charging a little bit of your car, not the whole thing.
Partial.
And new batteries, oh, by the way, those are safer and you have to baby them less. Like a lot of batteries, you try and charge your cars, for example, to 80%. Only or less.
Typical lithium ion, you only want to charge it to 80 or 90%, but the lithium iron phosphate, it's fine to charge those to 100.
And those are in a lot of cars now, especially the cheaper cars, because it is cheaper and, the less range is there. And we've talked about recently, a couple of years ago, sodium iron phosphate. That's using sodium instead of lithium batteries. These are cheaper because you know what? Sodium, salt, it's cheaper than lithium.
Yeah.
Easier to get and very abundant around the world. They're not energy dense, though. So that's a problem. They are very safe. They're a lot safer, like you can puncture them and nothing happens. Cold weather is basically okay. And they do many cycles. Like some of them are rated for 10,000 instead of 1,000.
Yeah.
So if you have that in a power grid and you're constantly charging and discharging the whole thing as much as possible, and it does 10 times as many, cycle lives, then the amount that you pay for it per unit of electricity you're getting out of it becomes cheap. And then when things become cheap, they deploy more and the grid becomes quickly decarbonized. So it's always a good thing.
Yeah, perfect for grid batteries. Maybe not necessary for car batteries because the car is probably going to wear out before the battery does. But, you can always do something else with that battery as well.
Yes, and it is in car batteries starting now in China for the last year or so. CATL has an announcement recently. This is the world's biggest battery maker, and they come from China. They are making batteries for everything and advancing batteries. They now have a 500-kilometer ranged car, which might not be in the real world, it may not be the same here. They are going to go mass production in 2026. They are starting right now and making it, which is sooner than anyone expected. And there's lots of sodium in the world. The energy density for that, if you're a technical person, is 175 watt hours per kilogram, which isn't bad. And it's going to continue to get better. They're going to improve those because they're brand new.
Yeah.
Look how far other rechargeable batteries have come in the last 20 years. It's incredible. And the prices have come down to just a tiny fraction of what they used to be. And so it's got distinct advantages in low temperature. Performance, carbon footprint is lower. Safety is much better. And these characteristics, the company said, make the technology well suited for expanding new energy vehicle adoption in cold climate regions, which is us, but it's also China, which I'm going to talk about later, the cold regions of China and how they compare to us here in Canada, because a lot more is going on there. So it is they want to broaden the geographical scope of electric mobility applications to cars, and that's what they're doing in China. The government wants everybody to drive an EV and make their own energy for it. So according to CATL, the sodium-ion battery could cover 40% of passenger vehicle demand in the domestic market in China. The world's biggest car market, by the way. It has now surpassed anyone else. they will make more EVs this year than Americans will make cars, period. All the cars sold in the United States is going to be less than the amount of EVs sold in China. And we're not talking about every car. We're just talking about EVs. So you could see them in grid storage because the energy density doesn't matter. You don't have to worry about the weight and how much room they take up. When a car is one thing, but a container in the middle of a desert or something doesn't matter. It can be used for that. So it's cheaper, lasts longer, and we can help decarbonize the grid. Now, here's one that we haven't talked about before, which I'm excited about. Lithium titanate. We got a lot of smart people listening to this show. So this one's a bit over my head. It's a bit new to me. So bear with me. Lithium titanate or LTO batteries offer superior safety, an extremely long life cycle, over 20 to 30,000 cycles, compared to 1,000 of your lowly lithium-ion battery.
Yeah.
So in a way, that's like, why put that in a car? Because the car's not going to last that long. The 1,000 cycles is almost good enough for any car anyway, because those tend to last 15 years or so anyway, as far as use goes. So, but in a power grid, this is incredible. I mean, you could have it up for, 20, 30 years in some cases and never have to replace it or recycle it. An excellent fast charging capability, low temperature performance compared to conventional lithium-ion batteries, but they come with a significantly lower energy density, making them more expensive and heavier for the amount of energy they store. Yet, China plans to put these in cars, Brian, for northern regions so that people are happy with their car performance because they work down to minus 50.
Wow.
Other lithium-ion types like LFP, lithium iron phosphate, and NMC, nickel manganese cobalt, provide higher energy density and lower costs, but have much shorter lifespans. So you pay more, but the thing lasts forever. So maybe it's worth it in a lot of applications. Maybe you put a battery in your home. And that's one thing, is putting a battery in people's homes, and then they can store the solar from their roof or the power from the grid overnight. That's cheap. If you have cheap power overnight, like a lot of people do, and a lot of people will in the future, have different time of day pricing. So it is much, much better with lifespan and performance across temperature extremes. It's hot too, like not just minus 50, but also plus 60 as well. So it's freaking fantastic.
Yeah, lithium-ion batteries, that's really what kicked off this whole revolution. Of course, they first started to appear in cameras and laptops, but it was clear that they could also work in cars. So this whole revolution is fueled by lithium-ion, but of course, that's not the only battery chemistry. There's many other things. Before we had lithium-ion, if you'll recall, for rechargeable batteries, usually they were NiCad, which was like nickel-cadmium. And those worked okay, but they just didn't last like lithium-ion lasts, and you had to replace your NiCad batteries much more frequently, and you weren't supposed to leave them at like a half charge or a low charge because it had some kind of a memory where then if you leave it too long, then it couldn't go past, lots of restrictions with NiCad batteries. Lithium-ion then changed everything, and of course, all these other chemistries doing even more.
This has been a Clean Energy Show knowledge break.
Okay, from Electrek, New York City is introducing a speed limit for e-bikes, mopeds, and other micro-mobility vehicles. And this is set to take effect next month. The speed limit is going to be 15 miles per hour, which is about 24 kilometers per hour. And anybody caught exceeding that limit, 15 miles per hour, could face warnings or citations. So they're going to start with it as kind of an education campaign. So they haven't exactly said how they're going to eventually enforce this. But the weird part of this is that this is just for motorized vehicles. So it doesn't apply to regular bicycles. And there's lots of people that can go faster than 15 miles per hour on a regular bicycle, but that's not restricted. It's just anything motorized, like a motorized bike. But of course, if you're going to apply a rule to motorized vehicles, that rule should probably also apply to cars, which are the most dangerous things on the road. They're always going over 15 miles per hour. They're killing way more people than bikes. So this is one of those weird growing pains when it comes to new technologies. And it's a bit unfortunate, and I'm not sure how they're going to enforce it. Are they going to set people out there with radar guns and start pulling people over and giving them tickets? And of course, there are dangers with this. There are lots of people, I'm sure, that go way too fast on electric bikes, and it does cause accidents, and people do get hurt or even killed. But, it's a little bit silly to focus on that instead of cars, which are really the things that are killing people. So I did a bunch of biking late in the summer, and we were biking one morning through a school zone here in our city. And the speed limit in our school zones is 30 kilometers an hour, which is 18, 19 miles per hour. And there was nobody around. There's no cars. And it had one of those radar things that tells you what your speed is. And because there was no other cars around, it was reading our speed on the bicycles.
Oh, yeah.
And it was kind of fun because I realized this, and I cranked up the thing, and I was able to hit 30 kilometers an hour on my bike, technically the speed limit in this speed zone. So, these kind of fast speeds are absolutely possible on e-bikes, but, I'm not sure this is really the solution.
We've got a photo radar near our place for 30 kilometers school zone, which is pretty slow.
Yeah.
And, I wanted to get a ticket or a picture.
Try and trigger it.
Get the flash to go off. But 24 kilometers, in my opinion, is pretty fast. Especially if you're in pedestrians or around, interacting with cars, not just driving beside them, but at intersections. It's pretty fast. I wouldn't necessarily want to go faster than that unless you were, going down a highway or something. Like I have a friend who lives about 30 kilometers out of town. He wanted to get an e-bike to commute. So, that's one thing, to go on the highway and on the side, lane of the highway and go maybe 50 kilometers an hour, which some e-bikes do. And of course, some go faster, but that would be okay. And wouldn't be any more dangerous unless he hit a rock.
I don't think I would end up getting a ticket because, that's about as fast as I would ever go. But I don't know. We're going to have to see what happens with that.
Mine goes up to about 30 kilometers an hour, but I'm not around anything when I'm doing that.
Yeah.
Like I'm just, and I'm kind of nervous. These days, I'm kind of nervous.
It's kind of scary to go that fast.
The older they get, the less confident you are on things like that. All right. Well, it's time for our letter from Japan. This came into us from our listener and Patreon supporter, John Hayes in Japan. And this is part one. I'm going to get to a second section of that later when he talks about what he's doing in Japan. But he's originally from where Brian and I live in Canada, Saskatchewan. He's from the Swift Current area where we have another listener, Bob. I mentioned you last week, Bob. Here you are again.
Yeah.
Because John brought you up, and hello to that area of Saskatchewan. It's also where our premier, I believe, comes from, or at least where he's situated now. Long story short, he's now a politician in Japan, and he went there to teach English. And, I almost did that, and we had a great conversation about that.
Yeah.
Like I was on the cusp of going.
You had a plane ticket booked even, you said.
No, I had the money for the plane ticket, which was a lot more than what John says you can get there now. He says you can get there for $400 from return from Vancouver. You can get to Vancouver, which I was in Vancouver. So I don't know, maybe someday. So the premier of our province of Saskatchewan recently stopped in Tokyo because he went to China. And when he went to China, I said, because this guy is so backwards in my mind, I said, go to China and check out the EVs, because the reason why he went there is because we put 100% tariff on EVs like the United States did from China, because, we want to protect our auto industry. And so our premier went around saying, well, I don't see any Chinese EVs, so I guess no one wants them. Why are we putting this tariff on China? Because now they put a tariff on our canola that is grown here in Saskatchewan because we're farm country here, and he wants that changed. But I thought it was incredibly naive of him to think that no one would want the Chinese. Most people don't want one because they don't know anything, but there are people who do. And if you see one that is $5,000 less and way more cool than the competition car made in North America, even with reduced tariffs, they're not going to be the same price they sell for in China because everything increases by the time you get here. But that's his thinking, and I don't like that at all. So when our listener, John, the Japanese politician, who's now kind of like, he describes it like an MLA or a state representative if you're in North America, he's a regional politician. He was a civic politician. He had a bar. He owned a bar. It started a bar for a while. Then he decided to get into politics because he was engaged with an issue that affected his bar, and it had to go out of business because of that issue. So he grew up in Saskatchewan, and he heard the premier was visiting, and he decided he would try and talk to him. So I have a clip of John, because we sat down at the University of Regina for an hour and a half and talked to him. And here's him explaining how he met up with the premier of our province.
So Saskatchewan has these trade offices around the world. When Premier Moe was slated to come, they said, okay, we're going to invite a bunch of people who are related somehow, however loosely. And so they sent me an invitation, and there were other people from Saskatchewan who were there. And then there were people who are Japanese in business with people from Saskatchewan. In any case, yeah, by the letter, I got accepted, showed up in Tokyo, got introduced to Mr. Moe when I first came in. So he was kind of standing with the ambassador, and the ambassador, of course, knows everybody. And so I had a moment to talk to Mr. Moe, and yeah, it struck me as a very, very serious guy, nice guy, kind of a good old guy, a good old boy in that sense.
Yeah, and John, it was interesting. I asked him how he got hooked on our show in Japan, and he said he went to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce Christmas party in Tokyo.
Yeah.
And there was two women from Quebec who asked him what his policies important to him were. And he talked about clean energy. And they said, oh, you should listen to this podcast. So it's not shocking that we have somebody in Japan listening as much as it is we have somebody in Quebec listening. So shout out to you in Quebec if you're still listening, because you are largely a French language province. And we haven't heard from any. No, that's not true. We have heard from a handful of people from Quebec, just not recently. But yes, we have heard from people from Quebec. So that was interesting. I'm going to read John's letter here. He continues, though I only had a very short chat with the Premier Moe before his speech, I could see he is a personal man, serious in his desire to guide Saskatchewan through very turbulent times. And devoted listeners may not agree with his government's policies, but he is basing his decisions on the data he has in front of him. And I will say this, Brian, I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
But I'll continue. Without getting into the weeds, it's not always about personal beliefs. Leaders have influence, but they are wise to save their political powder for issues very close to their hearts. More on that later, he says. Though I was only able to have a minimal FaceTime with the Premier, I did have a longer discussion with one of his staff members. The group has been visiting all the Saskatchewan trade missions around the world, so this time was Asia. And we know why he went to Asia. Travel for politicians is much more important than the average voter understands. Talking to the staffer underlined this. On their tour of China, one of their memorable impressions was how many EV chargers they saw lining the roads. So, they took my advice, took note of what's going on. I'm glad, because they have no idea what's going on over there. What they probably didn't notice is that every car around them was probably electric, but they didn't know that. But they could see the EV chargers.
It can be hard to tell which ones are electric. But, it's very similar to just going to Vancouver here in Canada. You go to Vancouver and it's nothing but EVs on the road. So many Teslas, it's really hard to miss. All right, I'm going to continue reading John's letter. I put in a few jabs about the lack of chargers in the province, and the staffer completely agreed. To be blunt, yes, the government could provide subsidies to install chargers on the main highways, but until now they have felt the cost in political points would be more expensive than the public money to be used. The staffer mentioned something about the political climate and the average Saskatchewan voter. In any case, they mentioned that there are companies who have plans to install more chargers on the main roads throughout the province. When I explained just how extensive the Japanese charging system is, they were somewhat impressed. We don't have stations with 50 chargers like in China, mind you, but at last count, we were up to 13,000 fast chargers, mostly tied to the Chatamo network. In principle, I can drive the length and breadth of Japan and never be more than 30 kilometers away from a charger, all of them on the same payment network. I mentioned to the staffer that I was getting my information about Saskatchewan from your Clean Energy podcast. Just so you know, they are aware of your work. I'm sure they are not as religious a listener as I am, but you are definitely on their radar.
So that's upsetting.
Yeah, I would prefer not to be on their radar.
I would too. And you know what, Brian? I had the sense that I was. And sometimes my senses are correct, because I had the sense that I was. Because you know what? I think that the EV tax that we have, that I pay, that you pay, that everyone who has an EV, it's my fault.
Yeah.
I literally think that. I honestly, genuinely think that.
Yeah.
I thought it at the time, because I went on Twitter and I posted about it. Mm-hmm. And I said, hey, another advantage of EVs, we don't have to pay road tax. A couple months later, we were paying road tax.
Damn it.
Because, and I'm the one who can least afford to pay it. So it actually affects me. All the other guys are rich and they got, good cars, and said, I don't know, I guess we got to pay our fair share. I don't want to pay my fair share. I want
Yeah.
I want, they did this when there was 400 EVs on the road in the whole province. Yeah. Like what, how genuine are you? It's not only what you don't do, it's what you do. And if you do have to do that and you do have to jump on the 400 and punish them for getting an EV, God damn it, I know where you stand, and it's not a good place where you stand. You've shown your colors. And this whole notion that he says that the political points would be more expensive than the public money used, in other words, they would be punished by the Saskatchewan voter. How stupid are you, Saskatchewan voters? How stupid are you? How ignorant are you? Get over it. It's coming, and you should go to China and see what's going on, because it's coming here. And yes, everyone's going to be driving an EV one day because, yes, climate change is real. I'm sorry to shock you, but it is. And obviously, disgusts me. But I'm going to continue reading John's letter, Brian. So regarding the coal plant, because, yes, we have a coal plant that's going to be extended to 2050, a quarter of a century, when it's supposed to be shut down in 2030, like all of them. It's supposed to be shut down, but no, Saskatchewan's special. We want to keep it going to 2050, and hopefully small modular nuclear reactors will be a thing by then. Maybe. The province is looking at nuclear energy as the main supplier of baseload going forward, John writes. At present, maximum power usage happens in midwinter when minus 40 temperatures are common. I wouldn't say they're common anymore. Yeah. 30s, yes. 30s for sure. It's common.
Once a year, maybe.
Once a year, usually. So far, but possible. According to the staff meter, wind turbines can't operate when temperatures drop below 25 below Celsius. That's not correct. It's minus 30 when they stop them. I don't know how accurate that is, John writes. Regardless, January and February, the months most likely to have weeks of minus 40. Not anymore. Maybe when we were kids. Not anymore. Also have the shortest days of the year. Yes, that's true. Meaning the investment in batteries would have to be significant to hold the necessary energy for stable baseload. Of course they would. It would have to be traditional chemical batteries like the ones we're talking about are bad. But there are other options for storing electricity. Water and grid interconnections are one thing. I'll get into what that is later. You can turn off a hydro dam and use it as a battery and turn it back on when the sun's not shining. Yeah. You can pump the hydro. There are different ways. There's new kinds of things. There's brick storage of heat. There's gravity. There's all kinds of compressed air things going on. There's different things. Yes. And they are actually in the testing phase now, different parts of the world. And John continues, the staffer also pointed out that building a new gas power plant only to be decommissioned when the nuclear plant came online could also be seen as wasteful. Extending the life of the coal plant is only supposed to be a bridge until the nuclear plant comes online. In 2050, they claim it's coming online in 2035, but he's telling John 2050, and that's kind of what we're hearing now. Especially if coal has to go to 2050, then they're not expecting nuclear to 2050.
Yeah.
Their estimation is that a new nuclear plant can be built before the latest extension expires in 2050. Saskatchewan has going for it is a significant supply of uranium, they said. We do have uranium, and a lot of the uranium used in reactors around the world comes from Russia. It is refined. They have to refine it for nuclear. And some people say that if countries get nuclear power, they can take that uranium and refine it further into weapons-grade uranium. So developing that resource is one of Premier Mo's pet projects, which concerns me when somebody has a pet project like that. Yeah, wouldn't it be great if we were a nuclear-powered province and we used our uranium? While uranium's not free, I know the government would get resources back from that. John continues, knowing what I know about the government, risk is deadly, to be avoided at all costs. Yes, that's why we never get anything done. But I would say the betting on the SMR, the small modular nuclear reactor, which really hasn't been a thing yet.
Yeah.
They're hoping to be a thing, and for it to be cost effective, they have to build a lot of these, and they have to settle on one design and build a lot of them. And that's not going to happen by 2035 in any way, shape, or form. And that's when we're supposed to decarbonize our power grids in the world. And we can do it. They will also be independent of world market prices for uranium, especially if they are refining locally at home. Well, you know what we also have here? Sunshine and wind. Just putting it out there. I think it's a pipe dream to refine locally, Brian.
Yeah, well, it really points to, we just have a resource mindset around here. I mean, Canada in general, but particularly around here, we're just used to getting all kinds of income from the natural resources in oil and gas or uranium. But of course, there's other things to do, and the oil really needs to stay in the ground if the planet is going to be livable.
That's what doesn't get me. It seems like a moral obligation to do everything you possibly can to decarbonize as much as possible, to do your part. And people say, well, it's hard. Well, we're going to find out how hard it is. There's harder places in the world, and we're going to get to that this week and next. Brett Dolter is an associate professor at the Department of Economics, University of Regina, here where Brian and I live, where he teaches courses in climate change policy, cost-benefit analysis, ecological economics, and microeconomics. His research is focused on modeling costs and consequences of climate and energy policy, and I will be speaking to him on Friday, so stay tuned for that. Now, he released a report on the Saskatchewan power grid. No one else really has, just narrowed it down to Saskatchewan. And the report was looking at 3 scenarios. If the federal government loosens their policy for decarbonizing a little bit here, a little bit there, what would that mean? So by 2035, he ran some of the numbers, and the power rates would be 6 to 9% higher than SaskPower's current plans for power rates. I remember when power rates used to go up 5-7% a year commonly. Like 10 years ago and 15 years ago. But that's, I that would be normal to me. But they've tried to keep it in check because it is a government-run crown corporation, as we say in Canada.
Yeah.
Arm's length. So that's about 1.5 to 2.1 cents per kilowatt hour. So we're paying 16 cents? So, it's not the doubling. Saskatchewan government says, we do this, we'll have to double the power rates. And of course, that scares the voters. And the voter says, okay, yeah. Premier, do whatever you want. I don't want to pay twice the electricity rates for this clean energy bogus nonsense. So delaying action, though, would cost more later. Of course, everybody knows that. Brett knows that. All scenarios show a 40 to 50% of capacity from wind. This is the scenarios that he's come up with. Wind is very important. Now, we have great wind capacity here, but only 40 to 50% of the capacity from wind, not solar. Saskatchewan's transition will rely heavily on wind imports from Manitoba, that next door. They got a lot of hydro there, a lot of hydro. But if you have a lot of hydro, Brian, you could turn the hydro off. If we get a lot of sunshine, we feed it to Manitoba through a new interconnection. They turn off the hydro. That's a battery. You don't have to think of a battery as always the battery. And then it gets cold, the wind doesn't blow, you send it back. You run the hydro again because the hydro is existing, it's already there. But they also want nuclear, so he's talking about that, and carbon capture. Carbon capture is when they use fossil fuels, which they love here, love fossil fuels here, and capture the carbon from it. Now, they're trying to do that with a coal plant here, not living up to what their expectations. It's also extremely costly. So, natural gas, coal costs more than renewables usually. Maybe not here because of our northern climate, our northern place on the planet, but you have to feed those plants and you have to capture it, and it's all very costly. It makes it more expensive. So wind is cheaper than solar in Saskatchewan, according to the report. I've been looking for information on that forever. And yes, solar, because it has great potential overall, but seasonality. We look at a sunny day in December, which is our shortest day in the Northern Hemisphere. It's like a fifth of what it is on a sunny day in April, May, June, July, August. So,
we're far enough north that our days in the winter are a lot shorter. We just have more of that than anybody south of us.
But I'm going to talk about possible remedies for that in just a little while. So SaskPower wants solar limited to 900 megawatts permanently. That's all they're going to ever put on the grid is 900 megawatts. And Alberta next door, they're a bigger province population-wise, but they already got 2/3 of that. And they probably would have all of that if they didn't stop it a couple of years ago. Yep. They didn't make it impossible for renewables to go up. It probably would have even reached what we plan to do ever. So Saskatchewan is somewhere about 1% or less now of solar. And, I'll be speaking with Brett later about this, but my main issue is why are we so impossible to decarbonize? And yes, I concede that wind turbines have to shut down, and there's currently no technology that I'm aware of. If there is, you get a hold of me. But the far reaches of the internet, I can't find anything on cold weather packages for wind turbines to get them below -30 operational. The air gets very dense then when it's that cold, so it moves. There's more energy in that wind. Here's some comparable places moving forward with renewables, despite their northern latitude like we have, and the fact that the sun doesn't always shine, yada, yada, yada. And the Netherlands, of course, we talk about the Netherlands a lot, now has over 23,000 megawatts of solar. Tiny country, tiny compared to Saskatchewan. A little blotch, it's like if we were Gorbachev, they would be the birthmark they had. That's the equivalent of it. So they have 23,000 megawatts. 23,000, not 900, 23,000 now. That's 25 times what we'll ever be, according to our power grid. And remember, a solar panel in Saskatchewan provides 1.4 times what it does in the Netherlands because we have more sunshine here. But we're also the same place on the globe. So we do have shorter seasons. It didn't stop them,
Yeah.
It seems like if you've got a climate crisis and you have any moral aptitude at all, you would go out and you would do what you can. You would add solar and wind as fast as you can. Solar's easy. You could put it on homes and rooftops. They stopped that program because everybody was doing it. We can't have that. It's going to cost everybody else who doesn't do that. That's not how you act when there's a climate crisis. The Netherlands has 3 times the population of us, so of course they're going to need more energy. That's a given. Of course, they're part of Europe, so you can interconnect there. But right now it's focusing on modernizing their grid. They're not waiting to 2050. They're modernizing their grid and incorporating solutions like energy storage, which we have only the tiniest amount, and they think it's pointless. The SAS Power guy at Pickleball said, they only got 1,000 cycles, those batteries, and then they're done, so we don't want to use them. That's the kind of ignorant crap that goes on here. And they think that, that's all that there ever is and ever will be. Well, no, the world is decarbonizing and this technology is getting better. They're not listening to our show. They should. Smart energy management systems to balance supply and demand. That's all part of it. It's technical stuff. It's beyond what we know here, but they're doing things to make the grid work. I mean, you can have an EV at home. You can charge it. It can power the grid when the grid needs a little bit of electricity. You can get paid for it. You get paid more than you would normally get paid. The Netherlands in the last 12 months, 21% solar. That's 21 on their grid now. And we're at 1%. And we got better solar than them. 23% wind. And that has all ramped up quickly. And yeah, it is colder here. It is colder here than it is in the Netherlands. It's cold in the Netherlands. It snows a little bit, but it doesn't generally get down to minus 30 or minus 22 Fahrenheit when they have to turn off the wind turbines. The icing, they will ice, like an airplane, they will get ice attached to them because the metal will just attract the moist air and it turns into ice. And then if it spins, it can throw off the ice. It can break the turbine because it is a moving thing, which is why I love solar, because it's just sits there and does its thing.
No moving parts, yeah.
Nothing to fix, nothing to look at. They are heated, these wind turbines in cold climates like ours. They're heated. The little thing in the box where the thing turns the turbine is, they're heated. Yeah. There's inverters in there. And they heat those up because the greases don't always work under very cold temperatures to lubricate it. So, yeah, they heat those and they use a little bit of electricity. So wind costs more in cold climates because you have to add these things. And they have little heaters on the fins of the blades that melt the ice off, but they still shut them down currently. Now, I've always thought, well, we're the only place with 6 million people in the Canadian prairies that gets this cold, so nobody's making stuff for it. They're not making the EVs with the best batteries for us. They're not going to care about us.
Yeah.
But there's other places in the world, and maybe China will be the developer of a new kind of wind turbine. Like, it'll be more expensive, but it still will operate in cold temperatures. All we really needed is down to minus 41. I mean, we'll put them in the southern part of the province too anyway, where most of our energy comes from. And so it gets less cold down there a little bit. All scenarios for Saskatchewan include nuclear, but a lot of solar and wind power for Saskatchewan's plans. But I watched a YouTuber the other day, and I like to talk about my YouTube videos, Brian, sometimes. He was testing vertical bifacial solar panels. What's a bifacial solar panel? It picks up sunlight on both sides. Mostly on one side, but a little bit on the back side too, so whatever reflects off the ground. But usually you put a solar panel so that it's perpendicular to the angle of the sun, and that's often around 30 degrees. It depends where you are on the globe, right?
Yeah.
But around here, it's, 30, 40 degrees or something of an angle. But he did some tests in Ohio of a vertical one in the winter bifacial. So sun would reflect off the snow in front of it and put more energy onto it, including on cloudy days. It would pick up more from the snow, but it also would pick up from behind it because it was white sun coming from behind it. Now, what happens with the vertical solar panels, they work great in the winter because the sun is at a low angle, but you don't get everything more that you would in the summer. But an interesting thing that he found out about that was that it's kind of like a flat line.
The production is almost constant year-round. February dips a little bit, but I think that was just an unusually low February. I don't have that kind of a dip on a typical year. I think an average year would be almost perfectly straight. So if you live in the north and need about the same amount of power year-round, you can avoid the snow buildup and have constant power production every month of the year.
So one of the problems when you're not on the equator and you put up lots of solar is that you get too much of it.
Yeah.
You got to get rid of it, or you got to sell it for free or sell it for negative prices. It's happening places in the world. Now, I say there's other things that you can do with that electricity. You can make hydrogens, for example, which I'll get to. But yeah, he was finding that it gave 31% more than your normally placed solar panels in the wintertime. I got one solar panel from a hardware store. It's 100 watts. I would love to have the device to measure the output of the day. I want to do a test. And now it's not bifacial, unfortunately, but I would love to do a test to see what a vertical panel does here in Saskatchewan. Now, Ohio's a little bit north, but it's not us north. And I have a feeling that if you really wanted to combat climate change and solar is so cheap, you would put up a lot of solar. Maybe some of them would be east-west, which also gives you a flat line in the summertime and a bit of a dip in the middle of the day. But you mix it up and you get a pretty consistent base load throughout the day instead of a bell curve. So I'd love to do that test, but they had only 77% in the summertime. But, 2035, 2050, these solar panels are going to be even cheaper than they are now, and they're cheap as cornflakes now. So I don't know, but it's interesting, and I love that. The link to that video should be in your show notes. I hope that it'll show up there. And the winter, he says, is basically a straight line of power all day, so pretty consistent. You wouldn't have to worry about that. You would know what you were getting. But I'm hung up, Brian, on the province where I live, and why it can't be decarbonized. And I think everyone should listen to us about this, because if we can do it, it applies everywhere, because it gets easier from here with our days. And I reached out to one of the top 10 climate researchers in the world, Mark Jacobson. And Mark Jacobson is a professor of civil and environmental engineering at Stanford University and a prominent advocate for transitioning the world to 100% renewable energy. He is also the co-founder of the nonprofit organization, The Solutions Project. He is known for his wind, water, solar, 100% renewable electricity benefits, which model a global transition to clean energy sources by 2050 to combat air pollution and global warming. And I said, Mark, does this work in Saskatchewan? And he said, hey, James, the solution for cold climates is not difficult. Norway and Iceland already produce 100% of the electricity with wind, water, and solar, hydro, geothermal, and wind. In Iceland, hydro and wind in Norway. Sweden and Finland are also far along. Wind also correlates strongly with building heat demand, so building wind in cold climates helps provide heating through heat pumps when it's cold outside. And we've developed a 100% wind-water plan for Canada as a whole, although haven't separated out the provinces. Best, Mark. And I hope, Mark, if you're listening, that one day you do the prairies, because I would love to see that. But I do know from looking at his thing on Canada that he includes all kinds of things like fire brick heat storage for his Canadian model. He recognizes that no concentrated solar is here. Concentrated solar is when you use mirrors to heat a fluid. And we tried that in Medicine Hat. It did not work. It was too cold and too snowy. So that was a nice try, but it's not working. And generally, normal solar is so much cheaper than concentrated solar that concentrated solar is shutting down around the world, including the United States. So he's not planning on growing hydro. He recognizes the difficulty with hydro, but keeping it for now, and some geothermal 23% of all end-use energy in Canada is used to mine, refine, and transport fossil fuels and uranium. 23% of end-use energy in Canada is to mine, refine, and transport fossil fuels and uranium.
That's a crazy statistic.
So we wouldn't have to do that anymore. So we need 23% less energy.
Yeah.
That's nobody talks about that. In a 100% wind water world, we don't need that. So another 30% is saved because EVs are more efficient than our current internal combustion engine system because we don't need the same amount of energy to drive a car. They're more efficient. They're like, we save 30% on that. Heat pumps use 75% less for home heating and 6 or 7% of savings for energy efficiency, which is all part of this mix. Remember, it's not just changing from coal to solar or whatever. It is also improving energy efficiency. Now, that's very important in Canada because a lot of people live in drafty houses. You're doing your best on your 1960s house to increase that, but it's tricky, and we need national programs to do that. 60% reduction in demand just by electrifying everything. 0.1% of Canada's land would have to go to 100% wind water in all sectors. 0.1%. And I think fossil fuels is way, way beyond that now. It's like 3% or something. And we complain about putting up solar panels because it takes up land. So 68% lower energy costs. That's the electricity that you would eventually have to pay for energy and for gas and everything and for heating your home. 68% less. And a 3-year payback time. 3 years. It's incredible. So let's look at the modeling that he did on Canada. Onshore wind was 45%. Offshore was 11%. We have no offshore wind in Canada. Rooftop PV was actually 11%. That's pretty significant. But we also see in other places in the world that it is becoming
even
that
more
sort of significant level.
Yeah.
Utility PV is actually less than 4%. So for all of Canada. So it's kind of surprising. So he's not really concentrating on solar as much as I expected they would. Geothermal is 2.26. We don't have hardly any geothermal electricity generation, if any, in Canada. And I've reached out to that place that's been in the works for 5 years. They have not gotten back to me, so it can't be going well. Reached out a couple of times. Hydropower is 25%. We have lots of hydro in Canada, and right now it makes up a lot greater percentage, so we would just keep that for the next several decades. Wave power, 0.1%. Tidal power, 0.2%. He's throwing in little things like this. Solar thermal heat, virtually nothing, but some of it would be for heating. And geothermal heat would be 0.5. So we don't have much geothermal resources near population bases as you might think in Canada. There's a link to his modeling in your show notes as well. There's a PDF that you can look at if you're interested. Storage discharge at a full rate. This is what I got from his report on Canada. 165 days of hydro storage. 165 days of, not hours, days. In other words, over a year of hydro. You could turn off hydro overall and have a year's worth of energy stored. So that is significant. I'd like to know more about that. I know some of our listeners are hydro experts. I would like to know more how that works and how many places you can do that and how many you can't. If the reservoir gets too full and it becomes problematic. So 10 days of heat storage is also in there. So brick heat water into steam. You heat the bricks and then it turns water into steam. The steam turns turbines, makes electricity like most turbines are these days that make electricity, come from water.
Yeah, there was a story in the news recently. The University of Toronto did a big energy upgrade project, and they included underground heat storage that they will just take care of and use it in the winter. And then the project is up and running and apparently works great.
Well, it's going to be a long show this week, Brian, because I was wrong when I said it was difficult to find comparisons to the 3 Canadian prairie provinces that house 6 million people. It's unique because it gets so cold here, colder than most of Finland, for example. Some people say, go look at Finland. But Finland, you know what cold is in Finland. Most of Finland, you don't get that cold.
Yeah, they're closer to the ocean than we are, so it doesn't tend to get quite as cold.
You got that current. You got the current warming them. Currently, the current might shut down. But one northern province in China has 25 times the population of Saskatchewan, so we're not lacking for population in the study, and is much colder than it is here. Yet it is doing what I've always felt we should do here. And we'll talk a lot about that next week as an example of hard to decarbonize places in the world that are doing things in spite of those challenges that we are not in Saskatchewan. But for now, let me give you the provocative example of a project in Manzhoula in northern China. Manzhoula is a city in the autonomous region of Inner Mongolia, which means it's kind of like Hong Kong. It's autonomous, but still part of China. On the globe, it's about as far north as the town of Radville in Saskatchewan. That's south of us, okay? So it is in the far north of China, but it's still kind of around where a lot of our power generation comes from in this province in Canada, in the southern part of it. Just north of where my government wants to build their first small modular nuclear reactor, which, by the way, $5 billion for one of those, and we need 4 of them. The average low there in Manzhoula in January is minus 28. Ours is not quite that. It's warmer than that. So it's worse than us. Yeah. It's 10 degrees colder than our average that time of the year, at the worst time of the year. And as far as solar goes, not only are they the same in latitude as that part of Saskatchewan, they have the same hours of sunshine as they do down in that part of our province, which is about 3,000 hours. So did they throw the towel on renewables and decide, wait a quarter century or more for nuclear? No, they doubled down on renewables. The Manzhoula Wind Solar Hydrogen Production Integrated Demonstration Project is one of many such renewable projects in northern China. Not just this one, but there's several of them that integrate wind and solar with green hydrogen production. What is green hydrogen? It is when you use electrolysis from energy produced strictly by renewables. So there's no emissions when you make this hydrogen. Hydrogen can be used to make ammonia. It can be used to turn turbines to make electricity. It can be used in fuel cells like fuel cell cars. It can be used on the grid with fuel cells as well. The wind, solar, and hydrogen production integration project involves the construction of a 1.5 gigawatt new energy power generation project, which consists of 600 megawatts of solar power, more than we'll ever have here, almost, and 900 megawatts of wind power. So kind of the same mix as we might have here, two-thirds of solar and compared to the wind, and a 60,000 ton per year hydrogen production project. So they're going to put up the solar, they're going to put up this wind, and it's going to make 60,000 tons a year of hydrogen with a total investment of 10 billion Chinese dollars, let's call it. It will be completed by the end of this year, as in, not when I'm long dead, this year. That's 25 years before Saskatchewan. And FYI, Brian, sit down for this one, 60,000 tons of hydrogen per year can produce 200 terawatts of electricity. And guess what? Saskatchewan, the power grid, just requires 24 terawatt hours of electricity each year. So this one project, 8 times our total grid. And they're finding a way to use wind and solar and make hydrogen. Now, it's not proven. It's really hard to find information on this project because it's China. Perhaps Chairman Xi will have me over sometime as his guest and we can look at things. But right now, it's really hard to find information on this. But this is what they're doing. And you have to kind of read translations from Chinese TV and things like that. So the cost of the project, Brian, 2 billion Canadian dollars. So 5 billion for one SMR that does a quarter of our province, or less than a quarter, but the quarter of what we need for nuclear in the mix. 2 billion Canadian. Now, things are cheaper in China. You can't take that and put it here and expect it to be 2 billion, but I'll bet you it's less than 5 billion. And I also bet you this is something that we know works because they're doing it now. They're doing it in other parts of the world. SMRs, as a taxpayer, climate aside, I'm uncomfortable with that because it could be, just feels like a boondoggle if it doesn't work out. Now, comparing that to burning coal for the next 25 years and then paying $5 billion for nuclear that powers a small fraction of our grid, that's completely different. So to power the whole grid, you would need 4 to 5 SMRs costing upwards of $25 billion, or more than 12 times what this Chinese project costs. And even if you use uranium from our province, which is great, it will still cost money to fuel that nuclear plant once it's built, and paying for security and also the decommissioning, which also doesn't happen. And the caveats are renewable hardware is cheaper in China. We know that, and it doesn't necessarily get here as cheap. There's an authoritarian government there that can snap its fingers. It doesn't have to answer to voters. That's what John touched on in his letter, it's not easy to be a politician. I get that. He can't even put up an EV charger without pissing off people in his ignorant province. Failure and risk doesn't affect the government as much over there. If they fail, well, too bad. Nobody's going to revolt necessarily unless they really, really screw up. It's a big country, obviously massive, massive country is population-wise and massive resources. Information about what's going on, though, is sparse. So green hydrogen generation, I would argue, is more advanced than SMRs at this point. So we know it works. The cost has to come down. It's going to come down eventually if they do. I question hydrogen, its uses. I think some people are pro-hydrogen for everything. Maybe this is a case for energy storage because we have such great wind and solar here. Maybe we make hydrogen. Maybe we sell that hydrogen in other places. Maybe we increase our economy. There are 630 electrolyzers in the hydrogen projects in the world right now. They're not all green. You can power them with anything. You can power them with coal. You can power them with solar. You can do whatever. But some, they're working, and it's not hard, to change that. It doesn't really matter. But that's what's going on. This is one example of a place colder, as far north, and they're doing things. And, we just throw up our hands and say, I guess nuclear.
Okay, this story from Electriv, the first autonomous border crossing. So the Swedish autonomous freight company Einride has successfully completed a border crossing using a cabless autonomous EV. The journey took place at a border crossing between Norway and Sweden and is the first time a cabless autonomous border crossing has taken place. Now, admittedly, the initiative has the support of the Norwegian customs authorities. Einride's onboard systems were integrated with the Norwegian digital customs tool Digital, so all goods were declared in advance. And it's also worth noting that, as well as that, Norway and Sweden share a particularly porous border, as they are both Schengen countries. There are 29 European countries that don't really have border controls anymore. They don't necessarily have these kind of checkpoints at border crossings. But, nevertheless, this is some kind of a step in the direction of autonomous vehicles. Einride is one of the leaders in that. They have completed some test runs on European roads of trucks that do not have drivers. And at some point, those trucks are going to have to cross the border. But apparently that is possible as well.
What a world we live in, Brian, but we've gone long, so I'm going to continue on with part 2 of John from Japan's letter. John Hayes is a politician in Japan, and we met with him, and this is part 2 when he's talking about what he's doing. He says, on to more positive news. I began requesting my city of Tsukuba to invest in solar panels more than a decade ago. The public offices around the city have many large parking lots with lots of good sunshine. Ideally, panels installed above these parking lots would help keep the cars below cooler in summer. He says it gets very hot there, very hot and humid, would also be producing energy. I was informed the other day that the city has finally come around to my thinking. Initially, they are looking at covering a 200-meter 4-lane avenue from the street to the various parking lots on either side. So in addition, they will add more panels to the roof and of the main office as well. And if it all goes smooth, the new panels may be installed in 2 or 3 years. And unfortunately, my request to cover the parking lots is still not in the pipe, but I can see movement after many years of frustration. Just to temper my delight, the city worker stressed just how much installation costs had increased, mostly due to the falling yen, and should have listened to me earlier, the silly billies, he says. On a different front, the city is also planning to add considerable number of EVs to the city's fleet over the next few years. That's good to hear. With the installation of solar panels will also come a new bank of 3 kilowatt hour, probably not kilowatt, but 3 kilowatt second level or level 2 chargers, both for the city office and public use. So, progress. I understand I'm on the far side of the curve. The administration can't even see me anymore. But with everyone's help, we'll pull the laggards forward. That's all for now. And he says some things in Japanese, which I'm not going to pronounce because, I can barely speak English. So thank you, John. And congratulations to you for pulling those laggards forward and kicking and screaming into the 21st century. And Brian, I was very surprised when John said that there's an EV charger every 35 kilometers. Yeah. Because my understanding of the Japanese market was they were very loyal to their national brands, Honda, Toyota, Mazda, Nissan, which only had the one EV. And by the way, John drives a Leaf, drove a couple of them, that nobody was driving EVs. But the government said, no, you have to, and they put up chargers. And
yeah. So their EV car production is still behind, but they seem to have sorted out the charging thing with a national policy to get it done. If you would like to contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. You can leave us a voicemail, speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow. And of course, you can join the conversation on our Patreon page and get some additional content there.
So we'll be holding some of our letters to next week. Join our Patreon as a paying member. You get all kinds of free perks. Thank you for all who support our show. We're very overwhelmed by your support. Coming up next is the lightning round. It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy and transportation.
Fossil fuel power generation has been falling across Europe since 2019, says Ember Research. The fastest growing energy is solar. Poland and Hungary are making huge gains. A federal judge rules that Trump's order stopping work on the Revolution wind farm offshore was arbitrary and capricious. The order caused 500 layoffs right before Labor Day. It stopped work on an 80% complete wind project, but hopefully that goes. From Bloomberg, China, the world's largest polluter, is set to cut economy-wide net greenhouse gas emissions 7 to 10% over the next decade. This is seen as a modest target, yet critics point out that China is in a strong position to lead on clean energy. Clearly they are. President Xi Jinping unexpectedly joined the UN Climate Summit in New York this past week. This is not the main UN Climate Summit, the COP, but he was there by video to offer his nation's 2035 climate pledge. So he's serious about it, I hope. Also vowed to boost wind and solar. Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, says it is still possible to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees and avoid the worst of climate chaos. We know it can be done if we supercharge the transition to clean energy, he says. It's a time for a CS fast track. A transition to 100% wind, water, and solar reduces the annual total tons of mining in the world by more than 84%, despite the need for precious metals, which are a trivial component of total mining tonnage. That is from Mark Jacobson. Reuters, the unexpected upside of Canada's wildfires. In Canada this year, wildfire smoke helped counter the extreme heat benefiting this year's canola crop. Canola, the crop we sometimes grow here and ship to China, but not anymore because it's got a tariff on it. So high temperatures and scorching sun can devastate the growing season, but it helped our canola. Brian, more research is needed on the smoke's impact on crops, experts say, but for canola, they grew a lot of it and can't sell it to China. So the premier went over there and said, take off our EV tax credits. I say, fine, go. We don't have an automotive industry here, but it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt in the long run, but probably good for the automotive. I mean, the world's more important than the automotive industry. Bloomberg Green, India's largest power producer, has sought the government's approval to bulk purchase nuclear reactors, part of the wider national effort to expand atomic energy capacity as the country seeks to reduce dependence on fossil fuels. Not just decarbonize, but get the dependence of fossil fuels that you have to import. The Trump administration wants to take an equity stake in Lithium Americas, a company which is building the country's largest lithium mine. So he just said climate change is a hoax. If you invest in renewables, you're going to go bankrupt. He told the UN that, but for some reason he wants a piece of this.
I wonder why.
That's from Reuters. EVs are currently replacing 1.3 million barrels of oil per day and set to replace 5 million barrels a day by 2030. Nigeria is going to establish a 1 gigawatt solar panel factory that is putting out 1 gigawatt's worth of solar energy capability per year in their factory. That's from PV Magazine. And finally this week, BYD has created a new kind of battery system for grids that can hold 14.5 megawatt hours of energy inside a typical shipping container, like the ones you see on trains or trucks or ships. How much is that? That's enough electricity to power about 500 homes for a whole day, Brian, with just one battery, with just one shipping container. This means big power plants would need as many units, far fewer than they used to, for the same amount of power, and wouldn't need as much land and would use fewer parts to store the same amount of electricity. So the system uses BYD's new Blade battery cell. That's a Chinese automaker and battery maker. Blade battery is not your normal cylinder type of battery. It's more of a blade shape. It's the largest battery cell in the world, and it lasts a long time, more than 10,000 charges, and recharges before wearing out. Again, normal, 1,000. That's what the grid operator said at Pickleball. Just 1,000. Well, 10 times that now. It also brings costs down so that storing electricity is just a little over 1 cent per kilowatt hour. That's negligible. So if you want to put up solar, you can do it easier now. It's easier to put up solar. It's easier to put up wind because the batteries are so cheap. They only add 1 cent to the kilowatt at price, which is not much, but it's a high proportion of, retail or industrial rates of electricity. BYD says they could cut the cost of building big battery projects by 30%. Boom, 30%. And this happens all the time, Brian, all the time. There's innovations like this that we talk about. They also launched a new device called the GC Flux Inverter. Sounds like something from a movie, but an inverter is what changes the electricity stored in batteries into the kind of AC power we actually use in our homes, schools, and devices. And this one works faster and more efficiently than most others. So you get more electricity when you have a more efficient conversion to from DC to AC and back and forth. It can handle sudden spikes in power without failing. All damn good news to end the show on.
Yes, that is the end of our big fat show. You can contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com, Clean Energy Pod on social media, and of course the Patreon page that I already mentioned.
Thank you as always to our Patreon Clean Club executive members, Green Bastard and Brett Rutley. And at the first of the month, we get to shout out all of our Clean Club supporters. Thank you all for supporting climate positive content, and we'll see you again in 7 days.
See you next week.